Hello, my name is Crypt13, and in today's video, we're going to be doing a deeper analysis, more specifically on Yae Miko's weapon choices. If you're coming from my full breakdown video, I did give you a brief overview on which weapons would be pretty decent on her, but I didn't go into depth about every single weapon. Today's video, we're going to go into a little bit more depth on more weapons, so let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm going to be using Lisa as our dummy here because she's also an Electro Catalyst user, and she deserves more screen time. Alright, so I'm first going to start off with her free-to-play weapons. Her just pure free-to-play weapons. So this is going to include Dodoko Tails, Prototype Amber, Hakushin Ring, Mappa Mare, and some 3-star weapons, the Emerald Orb and the Magic Guide. Also, there's going to be a new weapon coming called the Oathsworn Eye, which we will be able to R5, and I'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit as well. So first off, let's go ahead and start with the Dodoko Tails. Dodoko Tails is going to be a very solid weapon choice for a free-to-play Yae Miko. It's actually going to deal the most damage out of all of your free-to-play choices if this Dodoko Tails is R5 and if everything else is at R1, because, you know, getting some prototypes in order to refine these are going to be kind of a pain in the ass. An R5 compared to an R1 on the Mappa Mare Hakushin Ring, Dodoko Tails is going to be the most damaging out of all of them. However, with the Dodoko Tails, in order to make this weapon shine, you need to play it properly. So for a sub-DPS Yae Miko, this weapon probably will not be your best choice because you won't be using normal and charge attacks, which means that the bonus is not going to apply, and if your bonuses aren't applied, then the Dodoko Tails goes down in terms of damage. So if you plan to main DPS your Yae, this is going to be good because it's going to increase your charge attack damage by 32%, and when you hit a charge attack, it's going to increase your attack by 16%. So these bonuses are what boosts this weapon's damage, especially this charge attack hitting an enemy and giving you this attack bonus. That's going to make your E skill do more damage, which is the bulk of Yae's damage. Of course, when you main DPS Yae, you're also going to be using normal and charge attacks, so increasing your charge attack by 32% and also your attack by 16% is going to make that deal a little bit more damage. Another problem with this though is that it's a very big focus on your charge attack damage. Yae doesn't have a way to reduce the stamina consumption on her charge attacks, so if you spam your charge attacks a little bit too much, you're going to run out of stamina, you're going to get hit if you don't bring a shield, and then you're going to have a bad time. So make sure to consider all of those things if you decide to run Dodoko Tails as your free-to-play weapon choice. Next up is the Mappa Mare, and so when compared to R1, it's a little bit weaker than the Dodoko Tails, but not that much weaker, so this is a very solid option. This one is also not dependent on using your normal and charged attacks, so this one provides a little bit more consistency. The passive skill on this is also triggering an elemental reaction will grant you some elemental damage bonus, which is very easy to keep up, especially if you want to do Yae as a main DPS. So I'm not actually 100% sure whether or not this bonus passive effect works while you're off of the field. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but if I am wrong about that, please drop a comment down below. So this is another weapon that works pretty good for a main DPS Yae Miko, so that you can take advantage of this passive skill. If you decide to R5 this, it's going to be slightly better than an R5 Dodoko Tails, although by not that much. Percentage-wise, you're going to get about a 3 to 6-ish% damage increase, depending on how you play your Yae Miko. If you use more of your normal and charge attacks more with the Dodoko Tails, that percent gap increase might shrink a little bit. And then this Elemental Mastery subset increases your E skill damage. However, since the Dodoko Tails provides you so much attack percentage, this extra Elemental Mastery providing you damage bonus on your E skill, you actually don't end up dealing more damage on your E skill than the Dodoko Tails because this just gives so much attack. However, once you R5 this elemental damage bonus, and this being converted into more elemental damage bonus does increase your E skill damage to do more damage than the Dodoko Tails. Next up would be the Hakushin Ring, which I think is a very solid and underrated weapon for a free-to-play Yae Miko, especially more in the support slot. Although its damage output is going to be much lower than the Mappa Mare and the Dodoko Tails, its supporting capabilities are pretty good. At R1, you're going to give an extra 10% damage bonus, to all of your teammates if they deal electro damage, and also the elemental type of whatever was reacted with electro. So if you're running an overload team or a electro taser team, you'll be giving electro damage bonus and hydro or pyro damage bonus to your other teammates. Again, don't quote me on this. I'm not sure whether or not this passive skill can work even if you're off of the field, but if it does work while Yae is off of the field, this damage bonus is going to be very easy to maintain. Energy recharge also being the main stat here means that you're going to have better consistency on casting your elemental burst, especially if your substats on your artifacts don't give you enough ER so that you can cast your elemental burst off of cooldown. So even though the Hakushin ring might produce lower damage numbers, if you have higher consistency on casting your burst, in terms of DPS, Hakushin ring might actually beat out the Mappa Mare and the Dodoko Tails. Eye of Perception, I'm really sorry, but this weapon just isn't really worth it. It provides a lot of attack percentage and some extra damage from this Bolt of Perception, but it's just not very good. So I would avoid this weapon. Next are some 3 stars that are actually pretty decent for a free-to-play Yae Miko. We'll first start with the Emerald Orb because the Magic Guide, although it gives some pretty good elemental mastery and a damage bonus to opponents affected by Hydro, it actually turns out this weapon is not that great, even though on paper it looks like it might be. Emerald Orb though, pretty good because this gives you a lot of attack percentage at R5. 40% at R5 if you create a electro charge frozen or hydro infused swirl reaction. So as long as you're creating an electro charge reaction, you're going to give yourself a lot of attack percentage. Combined with the elemental mastery, which boosts your E skill damage bonus, that's why this weapon actually turns out to be pretty good, because we're mixing attack percentage and elemental damage bonus. Yeah, so at R5, this actually starts to compete with an R1 Mappa Mare. Definitely not bad for a 3-star weapon. You shouldn't really go for it if you have Dodoko Tails or Mappa Mare, since this is, after all, an R5 Emerald Orb, and then your Mappa Mare still has room to grow all the way up to R5. Just thought I'd mention it because it's actually pretty decent. Next is the new Oathsworn Eye, which is coming in the new patch. So the Oathsworn Eye is a 565 base attack weapon, and it also gives you a little bit of extra attack percentage, 27.6. And then its R5 ability is that your energy recharge will be increased by 48% for 10 seconds after using an elemental skill. So this one will also boost your consistency on your elemental bursts. It kind of follows the same logic as the Hakushin ring. Although the damage output on this weapon might produce lower numbers, its consistency on helping you cast your elemental burst may actually increase your DPS. And next up is the prototype Amber. And not a great choice for Yae, especially because we want our Yae to do damage. We don't want her to support and heal, but you can use it. It's not going to be great though because it relies on using your elemental burst, and your elemental burst is on a very long cooldown. So even if you wanted to use this, it's not going to be the most optimal. But if you have absolutely no other choices, you can use it. I won't stop you. Alright, next up are the gacha weapons, Favonius Codex, Sacrificial Fragments, and the Widsith. We'll go ahead and start with the Sacrificial Fragments and the Favonius Codex. In terms of damage, these weapons are going to be pretty low, but they will boost consistency. More specifically for the Favonius Codex though, because of the energy recharge substat and its passive skill. So low damage, but good consistency. Sacrificial Fragments, Elemental Mastery will increase your E-skill damage bonus, but it's actually not going to deal that much damage because you're missing some extra attack percentage. The passive skill on this to reset your skill is also not very useful for Yae because her E-skill already has an incredibly low cooldown of 4 seconds. You really don't want to use Sacrificial Fragments with your Yae. Next up is the Widsith, and the Widsith is a pretty strong weapon. At R5 especially, its damage bonus from the passive skill is pretty bonkers. It goes up to 120% at R5, 96% damage bonus, and 480 elemental mastery, compared to the R1, 60, 48, and 240. All of these bonuses are pretty good, the best one being the attack percent and the elemental damage bonus. But elemental mastery increases your E skill damage, so you still get a pretty decent boost. At Art 5, the Widsith actually will produce higher damage numbers than the Kagura's Verity. Don't take this to mean that the Widsith is better than the Kagura's Verity, and that's because the uptime on this weapon is incredibly low. You get 10 seconds of this buff, and then you have to wait another 20 seconds before you can get the buff again. So a very long downtime and not that great of an uptime. So consider how long your E skill lasts. 14 seconds, about 15 seconds. And so this is only going to last 10 seconds, so only about 2/3 of the time that your E skill is out. And then for the rest of that time, your E skill damage is not going to be boosted. And when the Widsith doesn't have its buffs, it's actually the worst weapon out of a lot of our other options. It starts to underperform against the Solar Pearl and the Dodoko Tails and the Mappa Mare at R5. It starts doing similar damage to a Mappa Mare R1, an Oathsworn Eye, and a Hakushin Ring. But at that point, the Widsith provides absolutely no bonuses or buffs, unlike our other weapons like the Oathsworn Eye and the Hakushin Ring, with their energy recharge and damage bonus buffs. So you might be able to go unga bunga for about 10 seconds, but then for the next 20, you're kind of just doing nothing too great. So in my opinion, yeah, it's pretty good. You're gonna see some pretty big numbers, but I personally am going to go for something more of a utility style if I'm going to be playing Yae in the support role. The next weapon is the Solar Pearl, the Battle Pass weapon. This one's just very solid, R1 especially. It's going to beat all of the other 4-star options, barring of course Widsith with buffs. However, in order to play this weapon optimally to get all of your buffs, you have to use normal attacks. So normal attacks will increase your elemental skill and elemental burst damage, and then using your skill and burst will increase your normal attacks. So this weapon is more suited for a main DPS style Yae Miko. The buff also doesn't last too long, so as a sub-DPS Yae Miko, it's going to be hard to keep this damage bonus for your elemental skills and the like. In fact, and I know I keep saying this, but I'm pretty sure that these passive skills don't work when you're off of the field. If I am wrong about that, please correct me. But nonetheless, even if these buffs last, even when you're off of the field, 6 seconds is not very long. So in order to maintain full uptime on your damage bonus for your elemental skill, which again is very big and a big part of her kit, you have to switch back into Yae and throw out a normal attack in order to get the buff again every 6 seconds. So that can be a little bit cumbersome. So out of all of the weapon choices so far, the thing you want to think about is which weapon provides the most consistency if you're going to be playing a sub-DPS Yae Miko, and then if you're going to be playing a main DPS Yae Miko, you can kind of just go for any of these weapons that provide the most damage. So in my personal opinion, Solar Pearl will provide the most consistency for a main DPS Yae, and then in terms of sub-DPS, Mappa Mare will give you the most consistency, because of the fact that this lasts 10 seconds. So this damage bonus is the one that lasts the longest out of any of our other weapon choices. Okay, now 5-star weapons. We'll go ahead and start with the Kagura's Verity, because that is of course your signature weapon, and this weapon provides you the most consistency, which is very important if you're going to be playing Yae as a sub-DPS, which is kind of how she's designed to be played as. So in that role, Kagura's Verity will provide you with an elemental skill damage buff up to 36% because this is a stack type weapon, each stack giving you a 12%. This damage bonus only applies to your elemental skill. Once you get those 3 stacks though, then you will gain a 12% all elemental damage bonus. The buff on her signature weapon lasts 12 seconds, so this means that out of every single weapon that we have looked at so far, this one has the longest time limit on a buff. So that means sub-DPS Yae, you just gotta switch in every 12 seconds in order to maintain all of the buffs. Every 12 seconds, just reset your totems and then you're good to go. All of that E-skill damage bonus as well makes the Kagura's Verity the most damaging weapon because our E-skill is so powerful. When it comes to our other damage numbers, like our normal attacks, charge attacks, and even our elemental burst, it's only slightly better than all of our other weapons. Next up, let's go ahead and move on to the Skyward Atlas. Skyward Atlas is a 5-star weapon that provides a buttload of attack percentage and then also a passive skill which summons a damaging cloud that's going to deal physical damage. The physical damage from the cloud is not very strong, it's pretty negligible. For a typical Yae Miko build, this cloud damage will probably deal about 3000 damage, assuming level 80 and a crit ratio of about 70% crit rate and 112% crit damage. And this, of course, would be average damage we're talking about, and not the actual crit damage. Skyward Atlas is going to be a pretty good weapon if you're going to be playing Yae Miko in a sub-DPS role, because of the fact that the Skyward Atlas doesn't have any conditional elemental damage bonus. It has an unconditional elemental damage bonus of 12%. So this is why in terms of elemental burst damage, the Skyward Atlas and the Kagura's Verity are actually pretty close. So this is a pretty good weapon even if you decide to play your Yae Miko as a sub-DPS. Next up would be this weapon here, the Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds. So this weapon is not too suited for a sub-DPS Yae Miko since the passive on this skill requires you to stay on the field. Every 4 seconds you'll get an 8% elemental damage bonus up to 4 stacks, and then you get one every 4 seconds. The stacks will also go away once the character switches out. So even if we assume 1 or 2 stacks, if you compare Lost Prayer to Skyward Atlas, Lost Prayer does slightly less damage than a Skyward Atlas. However, if we manage to get all of our stacks, then the Lost Prayer starts to be a more decent weapon. And so this means for a main DPS Yae, Lost Prayer would be the choice over a Skyward Atlas. Also, the fact that this gives us more crit rate means that in terms of artifact farming, you don't have to go as hard. Another implication of this weapon giving crit rate is that if you use characters like Bennett or Sarah, their attack percent bonus isn't going to clash. Unlike if you use Bennett and Sarah with a Skyward Atlas, because that weapon just gives you so much attack percentage. So you'll start to see diminishing returns if you decide to run that combination. So Lost Prayer has a better ceiling for increasing your damage. All that said, none of these weapons are going to be as consistent as the Kagura's Verity, and also the Kagura's Verity will give you the most E-skill damage. It will also give you slightly more elemental burst damage and normal and charge attack damage. And so here's why I think this. I calculated the damage for most of those weapons that we just talked about. And so you can see this visual here. The things that stand out again were the Widsith, but remember it's low uptime. High damage, low uptime. Kagura's Verity is the highest damage barring the Widsith and is the most consistent. If we take a look at the yellow, this is the Seisho Sakura damage at level 3, and this is 15 ticks of that. So notice that that yellow bar is definitely the biggest out of all of them except for the Widsith. Other than Lost Prayer and Skyward Atlas, this Lost Prayer is when we just have 1 stack, so you can see that it is slightly worse than a Skyward Atlas. And the Skyward Atlas has 2 different crit ratios, a 70% crit ratio with a little bit lower crit damage, and a 50% crit ratio with slightly higher crit damage. But you'll notice that we do slightly less damage because this is an average damage chart. You'll notice that the Widsith with the EM buff is actually still pretty decent, competing and slightly out-damaging our 5-star counterparts. This is because our E-skill damage starts doing some pretty good damage numbers. But then notice that our elemental burst is much weaker than the 5-star weapons. And then remember what I said about the Widsith with no buffs being the worst weapon? You can clearly see that it is pretty weak. No buff Widsith dealing damage on par with an R1 Mappa Mare and an Oathsworn Eye and about a Hakushin Ring. And also around the level of an Emerald Orb, which is a 3-star weapon. And then here's the Solar Pearl, assuming that you always have the damage bonuses. So this one is more suited for a main DPS Yae and represents more of a main DPS Yae. But it is the most solid out of all of our 4-star options, and actually dealing pretty comparable damage compared to our 5-star counterparts. Moving on to the Dodoko Tails, you can see that it's a pretty solid free-to-play option, assuming of course you can maintain all of its buffs. Compared to an R5 Mappa Mare, only slightly worse, but compared to an R1, slightly better. And then we go ahead and move on to the Mappa Mare, R1 and R5. This one is going to be the most consistent if you're playing Yae Miko as a sub-DPS. It does some pretty decent damage. And then we move on to the Oathsworn Eye and the Hakushin Ring. Oathsworn Eye, pretty good damage and also provides you better consistency with that extra energy recharge after casting your E-skill. And then Hakushin Ring, although the lowest damaging, provides arguably the highest utility in some extra damage bonus for your teammates, which increases your overall team damage output, and then also energy recharge for a little bit more consistency for Yae. And then you have Emerald Orb, which actually ends up dealing more damage than a Hakushin Ring, considering just Yae Miko's damage. And then there's the Magic Guide, which I thought might be good because it looked good on paper with all of its bonuses, but it actually turns out to be not that great. Alright, so those are the weapon choices for Yae Miko. If this video helped you out, or if you like this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button, maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. Also, don't forget that I have a Twitch and a Discord, links are down below. Come join, come hang out. Drop a comment down below and let me know what you guys are planning to use for her weapon. Until next time, I will see you guys later.